Welcome to our home. We bought this back in 2017 and moved in the next spring. It has been a labor of love. But what you see here used to be a blank slate, like an open canvas that only had the frame. And with Ruth's design creativity and my kind of love for doing architectural drafting, this is now the result. The gathering space that we're in here used to be a fellowship hall. And one of the things we tried to do when we renovated the entire building was to keep that sense of the gathering of people for friendship and love and laughter and music. And so this is where the family gathers when they come over. We have had as many as 8 people in the kitchen while we're cooking, and the rest laid out over here and spread out into the great room as well. We ended up having to live in here for about a year in just kind of pieces before we could feel what the space was telling us it needed to have. And that's when we began designing scale drawings and beginning to lay out rooms. When we first bought the place too, we both loved to cook and to entertain. And there was just a little window into the kitchen, and it was an old 1950s basic plywood kitchen. And so I took out the wall, put in a beam, framed that out, and gutted the kitchen all the way down to the studs and the floorboards. And Ruth designed what is a gourmet chef's kitchen. It is great fun as you look at it. So as you begin to look into here to this kind of a space, it gives you ample space. It's got the quartz center island. It's got Brazilian granite countertops. We wanted something different. And then she located imported Italian subway tiles that were hard to find, but they just added a sense of depth. And part of it was with her design to it, and she can speak to that, but it was to make it look like it has always been here and yet have all of the modern conveniences. So we were trying to respect what was the era of this building.
On this side, the addition was put on in the 1950s, late 1950s. But when I picked out some of the pieces to go in here, like the chandelier, it makes a star. And when we picked out the flooring in here, we picked out acacia wood, which supposedly was what Noah built the ark out of in the Bible. So it kind of feels like church. And we reflected a little bit on what makes a kitchen, and that's having family in here. So this is family space.
If one were to look at the original photos, this was actually an accordion door, 17 feet wide, and we needed to frame it so that you had a sense of space. It was too wide, too much dimension, so that's why we came up with the idea of putting in a bonus room, which would be accessible to the whole house. The flooring is actually old growth Michigan red pine called pumpkin pine, and most likely the trees that were harvested were growing around the time that this country was first established, because they were laid in 1873. The bell tower, when we'll look at that in just a little bit, the bell tower is made out of fir and oak from old growth forest here in Michigan. So in some sense, this house embodies the beginning of the state of Michigan itself and almost the beginning of this country. When this part of the house was first built as a church, was it Ulysses S. Grant was president of the United States at that point. So this has seen generations and generations of love and laughter and relationship, sadness and celebration. And we wanted to honor that. So when we rebuilt this, we began to bring in old pieces. These corbels came out of a mansion in Flint and were reclaimed. So it gives it a sense of weight and structure and substance. But the floor was covered with milk paint and then ugly mauve carpeting glued down on top of that. So it was a labor of love getting all of that peeled off with one of our sons helping, and then we professionally had the floor refinished so it could breathe once again. One of the challenges with this room is it's 30 by 50 in size, so it's 1,500 square feet. Again, was to create smaller spaces, and that's where Ruth's decor capacity really helped. Eventually, we began to look at how would we create the dining space itself. The dining room was in 3 different locations before we finally landed here. But we decided to take the risk of taking off all of the soundboard and the plaster and the lath and uncovering the 1x12 planking that was first laid And then I found an old beam, a cherry wood beam out of a horse barn up in Frankenmuth that allowed us to finish out a defined dining room space. Hung the chandelier with, again, assistance from my son. That was a little challenging. The painting is actually an inset painting in oil that was probably put in the 1940s. And so we have a 7-foot Jesus as shepherd that stays with the house as a part of the ambiance and character of this space. We decided to create a smaller space on this side. We've called it the library. At one point it was the wine tasting room as well. But it's just an intimate space. We created paneling and sconces so that, again, the character of that era, the late 1800s, would be captured within the building. It also helps by defining the space so that you can appreciate the visual while not losing the sense of height that the room offers to you for space.
As part of the design, we decided that the pews were special. So we took the pews and made them into this big table back here. They've been planed down and put together so that it's a nice flat surface, but the pews themselves had a little bit of a curve to them. So every once in a while there's a divot in the table. You might spill something.
And that's been one of the lessons in redoing this house for both of us is if you're going to create a space that's usable for the next generation, you want to honor what was, but at the same time not be captured by it, not be imprisoned by the design or the layout. You have to be free to create what's new life for a new generation. And that's been one of the joys of doing this is now it can breathe again and not just be a parking lot in town. One of the important things in this house was to redefine how you look at things. And so we didn't want this sole focus to be where the old altar used to be. It's no longer a church. It was deconsecrated. It needs to become a welcoming home. So we decided that the living room space would need to be on this wall, focused in this direction. And that's when we decided to put in a gas fireplace and mantle so that there was an intimacy. In the wintertime, it just warms you up in the morning to come in with a cup of coffee, wind down in the evening in this kind of an environment. So this entire area is really kind of a free flow space. But again, we've had as many as 17 to 19 family members in this room at the same time, sprawled everywhere, enjoying the space. When we first moved into the space, these doors were old vinyl clad, cheap doors, and we decided for the grandness to be here, we had to really take up the height and create the molding around it that would give a sense of the history, that time period in history. So we custom ordered the doors, had to knock out, frame out, put in new headers and everything. And then the shelving is made out of the seats of the pews again. The intent was to reuse as much of this space as we could.
We still have the original bell in the bell tower. It's quite a ways up there, I'm not exactly sure. We think it's 40 to 45 feet up for the bell. And it does ring. Got to get it started though. There it goes. The neighbors like to hear it. They'll tell me when they hear it and say, I loved it. I heard the church bell ring today.
And this particular piece was stored in the back shed. It is likely the original altar from the 1873 church. And then when they renovated in like the 1960 era and contemporized it, this piece got stored because they didn't know what else to do with it. And we decided to let it become a part of the architectural art of the home itself. And so that was added in.
This was the pastor's study, and it originally had a doorway that went to the back with steps that went out to the parking lot. And now it's a nice guest bedroom that it's very quiet and peaceful back here, has good karma.
So one of the reasons we took on the project was that we really didn't want to see this building lost to this village. Our fear was it would become a parking lot. It is one of the oldest, not the oldest, but one of the oldest still remaining buildings intact in the village of Argentine. And when we took on the project, we would have countless people stop by, come in even unannounced, and talk to us and ask us what we were doing. And then they would come back to say, thank you for saving this for us in this village. And we still get cards even today. People will say, we heard you ringing the bell the other night on New Year's Eve. It touched us. So part of the intent is to gift back to a community a part of their own history. It's a home, but it also helps a village remember part of its past. It's not lost to them now. And so that's been a part of the joy for us, is redeeming it and turning it back into the next generation of life.